Good afternoon, everyone. It's March 19th, 2024, and this is the Curriculum Subcommittee of the Brookline Public Schools. We'll start, if it's okay, with approval of the 2/27/24 minutes. Do I have?
I motion it.
Motion, thank you, Stephen. Do I have a second? I can second it. I'll second it. Stephen, your vote?
Yes.
Natalia?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. Thank you. I'm going to switch this around just a moment. On our agenda, we have discussion for data requests for the 9th grade unleveled English. We actually are not going to do that today. And Jody, if you're there, you want to just give us a quick explanation about that? It's not that it's not important, but there's a
No, I'm laughing. She's on the phone and she's going to join us in a few minutes.
Okay. So I can just share with you that Jody shared with me that the 9th grade team, English team, and the high school administration would like to step back for a moment. And I think they're going to look to partner with perhaps a higher level group. I mean, not higher education, maybe a college group that might help them think about this. And so they aren't quite ready for that input from us. So they've asked that we could postpone it so they wouldn't attend today for that. And we will put it back on the docket sometime later after they've had a chance to gather some thoughts as well. Is that okay with everybody?
Okay.
Okay, thank you. But hold on to your thoughts about that, Stephen, because I know you've got good thoughts, so that's good.
Okay, I had put a bunch of materials together for this meeting on that. Can I just, does anyone, I'll just hold them all. I'll hold them all. I'll hold on to them.
Okay, thank you, because I appreciate that you did that. I just got the word on this, I think, last night, so that's why you didn't get any more notice. Okay, Michelle and Matt, are you going to run us through the data dashboard?
We are.
Yeah, so I'm gonna let Matt start.
Yeah.
And
So thanks for having Michelle and I hang out with you this afternoon. We are really excited about a new partnership that we have with a group called Open Architects. And what Michelle and I wanted to do as we're in the early stages of rolling this out is we wanted to build in some time for all of you to actually experience the tool, so you sort of get a feel and sort of a taste of what educators are going to have available for them. Before going into the tool, Michelle and I also just want to provide a little bit of a context for how it is that we're using data right now in the district, and how it is that Open Architects is really going to help us solve for a couple of problems that we're experiencing when we're using data. What's great, and Michelle and I have absolutely felt this, and particularly in the last couple of years, that there's this increasing desire and want and engagement around data broadly within schools. And we're really seeing administrators, classroom teachers, specialists, central office staff, of course, really using data to understand the strengths and the needs and the goals, not only on that 30,000-foot view at the district level, but really sort of going down at the school level, the grade level, the classroom level, and the individual student level as well. Really common as we are building and refining programs for students that we're using things like attendance and grade data to help develop those programs. Michelle and I have done a lot of work this year with CSTs around supporting a problem definition and how it is that data really helps support that. Oftentimes, when we're thinking about a problem-solving process, that problem definition piece is oftentimes thought of as maybe being the most important part of that process, given that all of the interventions and supports that we're going to provide a student is going to be based on that definition. And then finally, when we're thinking about how it is that kids are responding to Tier 1 instruction, how it is that kids are responding to Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports, making sure that we have a database for measuring that. And what we know from a decision-making process, that when we are using data to make decisions, they're going to be way more accurate. They're going to be way more effective than a process that is more purely clinical in nature. And it can happen sometimes where we are making judgments that's just purely sort of based on hunch or based on clinical judgment. and that is prone to bias and error. And so we're not necessarily saying, hey, you can only use data to make decisions, but we know when we marry data and that clinical judgment, that's where we tend to get the very best decisions for kids, for programs, and it really sort of moves us towards the goals that we have across the district. Oftentimes, and we see this in the strategic plan, we'll have reference to MTSS, or multi-tiered systems of supports. And for us, using that as a structure within schools is really important for efficiently and effectively using our resources to making sure that we're meeting the needs of every single student. You really can't have an MTSS architecture without really good data systems in place. Because a fundamental part of MTSS is that at any given moment, we understand how it is that kids are responding to core instruction. We understand that how kids are responding to intervention, and then we're shifting resources, interventions, instructions based on how kids are responding to them. And so we have some good work that we're moving towards in that space. And of course, we have some more work to go.
Yeah, so we want to recognize the experience of data in Brookline. When I first came, all we talked about were the MCAS, and there were a lot of really big concerns. So what this is built from is, this is 6 steps to accepting data that educators, people go through as they're learning the data. And one of the things that I think we noticed as we were looking at this is that we've really moved towards that intrigue and digging in, whereas a lot of the conversations early on were about like, well, the questions are bad. We don't teach it in this format. And that's really typical of a school district or any organization to go through as they're learning. But it was really good to look to see that actually we are hearing more of those conversations around intrigue and digging in. And so when we started to look at these processes that we could bring in with a really good dashboard, we got excited. And so,
one thing I'll add too, and I think it's important that we change the relationship that people have with data. I think sometimes, I know Michelle and I, when we're positioned and talking with teams about information, it can feel critical. I think sometimes people think if we're coming in to talk about data, we're going to use it as an entry point to talk about all the things we're doing wrong or all the things that we need to change. And a little bit what we want to demo later is that we can absolutely use this process to celebrate the heck out of the really good work that it's doing, because we always want to lift up and do more of what is working. And then, of course, it also introduces entry points for changing practice.
And the last thing with that is also, if you look at the language of changing practice, it's, I know what my students aren't understanding. I can write lesson plans. It's not about me as a person or my practice, me as an individual, whether I made good or bad. It's knowing through the student lens and the student outcome, how to change my practice. And that's where ultimately we would want to head. And that's where the MTSS process supports the work. So we're going to also, so I picked this picture out for a reason. I was thinking about this. I was like, if I sat through some of our data presentations, this is what I would look like, because they're boring. And so what we want to make sure we're doing, in the past, we presuppose what you want to hear about our data and which data points you want to hear. And part of what we're doing today is allowing your access to the data to really see what it can do, what we have, so that we are having conversations with you. Instead of more of a presentation style, because again, I don't want to look back at school committee tapes and see this on the screen. So as we move into our piece today, we want to make sure that you know that our data sources have grown immensely. When both, I think we talk a lot about when we both first arrived, it was like a little bit uncomfortable to talk about putting in a data system. The data sources that are bolded on here are bolded for a reason. They are data sources that give us very clear pictures of students, so that they're either normed against a national norm, they're number-based, or even if it's student survey, it's specific data. One of the reasons that some of those other pieces aren't dark right now, it's not that those won't show up in the Open Architects, but they're not measured against something that's similar. We're not looking at students against the same piece. And we have this conversation all the time that once we start to move our schools towards some similar practices, so that if you go to school A or you go to school B, and I know this conversation has come up recently with, as we talk about 8th grade recommendations, we'll have a better opportunity for students to have these be more comparative. But right now, we are sticking, when we talk about the comparison data, to those darkened pieces. All of these, well, not the teacher evaluation, but anything for students, we are eventually going to be able to load into this system. So we are currently working with the company to add all pieces of this data. As I sent to you in the email, we're only going to look at 2 of them today. And then also, it's what we do with it that's really important. So the first thing we always do is we do look for celebrations. So any data meeting I sit in, I think, what went well? I always want to know that, because data isn't meant to flog people. It's meant to give us a picture. And then identify the existence of problems and define the nature of the problem. So when Matt talked about the problem definition, a lot of the conversation we've had this year is about how do we identify the needs of our students, especially, for instance, if a student comes to CST. Are we looking at the whole student? Are we looking at individual problems because they got flagged for a math test or an ELA assessment? Or are we really looking at how do they feel within their panorama data? What is the DIBELS? What does it all tell us? What does their attendance data tell us? And then eventually we want to, as we're going through the process, we make a plan. How are we going to work on this? So one of the things we've talked about a bunch of times is looking at the pyramid and saying, like, we say that X number percentage of students need support. Sometimes that's the base of the pyramid and we should be looking at tier 1. So whether it's an intervention or something we have to change in the classroom, and then being able to monitor that. So to see the impact of those interventions. So we really want to be able to do it a lot with our data. And I think this system is going to provide us that opportunity, but we also want you to see what it is we do with it. So I'm going to pass it on to Matt.
So a challenge that we experience, and a challenge that a lot of school districts experience, is that it's great that we're collecting a lot of data. We have a lot of information, but they are living in different places. And so that in that previous screen, you just saw a bunch of different sources of data. Those are oftentimes housed in very different platforms, right? So we have Aspen, we have Panorama. The DIBELS data is housed in an amplified platform. We have Canvas for grade data. And what can make it really hard are for teams to sort of take that whole child perspective and understand what are grades, what are attendance, how are kids feeling. And all of those sources of data are really, really important to come together to understand what a student's needs are. And so what Open Architects is sort of meant to address that very real problem that school districts experience. And what they essentially do is I've used this term, sort of they're plugging into our data sources, where every evening they're pulling out reports from all of those data sources and then collapsing them into a single dashboard. What you're going to see in a moment is actually not an example of a collapsed dashboard. You're going to see DIBELS data. You're going to see attendance data separated. But what they are building out right now, and you sort of see an example of this in the corner, where all those columns are actually different sources of data. So you'd be able to see at one snapshot how it is that a student is functioning across multiple domains. And I think a responsibility that Michelle and I feel very real is that if we're going to be asking folks to use data, it has to be digestible. Make sure that it's really, really meaningful and we have an understanding of what it is that students need. So this is why we're excited for it. And so here are, actually there's even more dashboards that's going to be available for folks. But what you're going to experience is how is the depth and the breadth of analyses that you can conduct in each of those areas, while also giving that overall snapshots for students. So we're going to play around with DIBELS and the attendance.
Yeah, and just so you know, we aren't expecting every role group to be able to use each of these. So the idea is to match the dashboard with the proper role group. So like, we will keep a separate attendance dashboard, but it may be school secretaries and principals that have that versus some of the other student large dashboards that Matt showed that had multiple things, and that may be just teacher levels. So we have that freedom to work within these.
Yeah, and I think what we're excited about and hoping one of the outcomes from our work together today is, as you're going through the dashboard, sort of thinking through, okay, this is interesting. Here are the questions that we can pretty easily answer as a result of open architects, and having a lot of that guide the conversations that we're having. And also hearing from teachers and principals and vice principals and basically everyone as they're interfacing with this, just having a really good understanding of what we're able to know about kids, both in the moment and across time. Yeah. So I think we want to move into
Just trying it out. Yeah. So we have the 3 questions here that we talked. Oh, sorry, Suzanne, go ahead.
Well, so here's what's kind of interest to me, and I've been talking about this for years, is that it works best, I think, when grade level team can have conversations about these 3 questions. What are we celebrating? Existence of a problem, and what steps will we take? It's hard to do that as a teacher, I think, alone.
It is.
I mean, it's a little overwhelming, like you've said. So could you just kind of briefly go over again the opportunities teachers have to work together? I guess I'm most concerned about the K-5 group, because I think middle grades and high school certainly.
Yes, that's a great question. And what's good is that there are structures in place. The most common time is common planning time, or CPT. You might hear the acronym.
Yeah.
Is a time where teachers come together, and is where Michelle and I first got excited with this is around CST, so that teaming structure of it. Because as you play around with it, so what we sort of envision is a meeting where educators are looking at a common screen and looking at common students, and very clearly you're being able to identify at the grade level, at the class level, at the student level, where our strengths, where our needs, where are we setting goals. And so very much we're thinking this is going to help facilitate that teaming process to have conversations about kids. Yeah.
So to your point though, we're not quite there yet. So like Matt and I have been working mainly with the CST, and we're starting to work with, we've shared with some principals, we've had some principals sit in on our conversations to determine how we do exactly what you're talking about. And with this year's DIBELS data, so we didn't have this dashboard, so teachers were having to work through the DIBELS. We did set aside like 3 specific data meetings, where at one of the faculty meetings during each, at beginning, middle, and end, this is what the process we would like to get teachers to, where they are doing exactly what you're talking about. But you're absolutely right. These should be our regular questions as we look at student work as teams. I think like when I showed you that six areas of like growth to get to, it's new for us. So we're starting to get those practices in place, but I wouldn't say like we've gotten across the district yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Right. So CS teams are child study teams, correct?
Right.
Yes.
Yep.
And those are, do teachers request those, that they have a student, is a particular student, or do they go through the whole class at a CST?
That's a really good question. I think it's different depending on, we've heard all different scenarios.
But typically, so it is an educator. Sometimes it is a classroom teacher. Sometimes it's a principal. We'll refer an individual student to be presented to the child study team. Sometimes processes allow 2 students per meeting to be discussed, but typically it's a focused meeting of a student that's being talked about.
Right. So that's different to me than having a common planning time.
Correct. Very different. Yeah.
Okay.
No, but the goal is what we've learned. I think what we've learned is we have more people interested in the data, so that they are more interested in doing this on a more regular basis, so that, and like our like when we had the ELA, the first 2 data meetings this year, so the beginning of the year, middle of the year, Matt provided the teachers in the older grades with a similar structure to go through panorama data. So everybody was looking at data at the same time. And so teams were looking by grade level at the Amplify data, the DIBELS, and other teams were looking at the panorama. So we are trying to build that culture, like you said, to look at this work together with a framework that gets us to supporting students in the classroom.
Okay, Stephen and Natalie, are you with me on this? Do you know what I'm talking about?
A little bit. I mean, I think, Suzanne, I was going to say, I've had experience with my children in IEP meetings, which is like a group, and those, I wish, like sitting through that, being like, oh, wouldn't this be wonderful for all kids to have this opportunity? But I guess the bottom line is like time and all of that. So, and I mean, I was going to ask what I am struggling with, and I'm trying to say is why we're reviewing this as a curriculum subcommittee, but this seems to be looking at data across, is it because we're supposed to be focusing on the curriculum educational attainment? I'm trying to know what to focus on.
Why do we do this?
Yeah, why is it in this subcommittee and not the whole school?
That's where I'm at too, actually. I would love just to go to.
Let's back up a little bit.
Yeah, thanks.
This data, in general data, helps us determine what we are doing in the classroom. So if we see but we can't look at our data in one dimension. So we don't make major curriculum decisions just using the MCAS. We don't make instructional decisions only using the MCAS because it's after the fact, it's one number, and we need to have more sources. So the reason we're bringing this to you is now we have some more sources. So as we're making decisions instructionally, for materials, you've asked about, for instance, SEL materials and curriculum. We want to show you the data that leads us towards how we use data to lead us towards those decisions and for what's happening in the classroom. And so what we're doing is we wanted to model what we do to look at data when we think about these decisions. So today's data that you're going to see, it's district level. It's not individual student. There's some school level data, but it's not individual teacher. It's about how we look at the entire picture and like noticing things. So Stevens, a lot of times you will ask us specifically about some of the skills from the science of reading that we may not be tackling best. Here we can look at how are our students doing in those specific skills to really say, is that true? Test it. And we can bring that to you to say, here's why we've made a decision or why we haven't, because we have a broad set of data.
And what Michelle and I are thinking about the attendance and the DIBELS platform. So obviously the DIBELS data is going to be a really important metric that we're using to evaluate literacy instruction. One of the things that we use if the literacy outcomes aren't great is attendance potentially an issue of why they haven't responded, right? So we thought those two data sources could be an example of that iterative process that we would go through to evaluate curriculum broadly, then also sort of other instructional practices.
So I think some of your question was why here and not in the whole school committee?
Oh, I think you meant why here in general. I'm sorry.
There's a little bit of that probably. Why even, yeah, but also why here and not in the full school committee. And it is possible this could go to the full school committee if we think that that's really important to do. But one of the things we're trying to do in subcommittee is to take deep dives, and it's harder to do that in the whole committee. So this is kind of give us, because we're on this committee, this subcommittee, an opportunity to take a deeper dive than we might take in the whole committee.
Are we good to sort of move into the practice? Oh, Natalia, did you have a question?
No, that was a thumbs up, move forward.
Oh, good. Okay. So I'm gonna give Matt, so we're each gonna show you, we're gonna orient you to the dashboards. And in doing so, I think I'm logged in. Whoops. We're gonna orient you to the dashboard because it's not easy to just, there you go. I don't have my glasses. We're gonna
Michelle,
yeah.
Michelle, can I, before you get to that, so on your presentation, you had the three things that you're looking for, the celebration, the problems, and what was the third thing again?
Oh, so the third one we're not going to get to today, but just to show you the full look is the first thing we're going to do is look at for celebrations. And then we're going to look at like what things cause you to pause, like where do you pause?
Yeah, I think the place where I got stuck just now in my brain was like I guess so the way I use dashboards for my own work is I guess I have like a success narrative, and so I need to use my dashboards to make sure I'm making progress towards the key indicators that would define my success.
Yep.
So in something like attendance, I would want to say like, well, what does successful attendance look like? So
Yeah,
that doesn't really fall into these three ways of cutting at the dashboard.
So I think, Stephen, if we think about it at a district level and we think about the strategic plan, and we think about the data that we need to collect for the strategic plan around attendance, like when we report out, we will be using this data. So the strategic plan has measurable outcomes related to attendance. It has measurable outcomes related to performance. And now what we'll be able to do is more easily have more than just the MCAS available to us to discuss student performance in a way that's more meaningful for the committee. Does that help?
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I couldn't slot that way of looking at the dashboard into the ways that you'd presented, Michelle, and I was taking like the big picture look and my
Yeah.
brain was getting stuck.
Yeah, absolutely. But when you
Okay.
described what you were talking about, I was like, actually, that fits right in. So
Okay.
if you take a look at the way the data, and what we're going to do is we're going to each walk you through to orient to the specific data that's there. And then we're going to give you some time to do your own roaming and looking for those like celebrations or something that causes a pause, and be able to talk to us while you're doing it so that you have that opportunity to really dig into the type of work that we're doing with this. Yeah,
I mean, a celebration, I'm thinking, Stephen, could be that we hit our attendance goals, or maybe one that the state has set for us, so that a celebration would be making goals, identifying the problems might be not making goals. And so then we would go into interventions. That's how I think about it.
Yeah, so what I have here is obviously the attendance dashboard. And so when I presented at a full school committee recently, this is actually what I used to do a lot of that update. And so some of these images may be pretty familiar to you. So the way that most of the dashboards work is that you'll be brought immediately to this summary page. And so here we're seeing at the district level some of the key indicators of attendance. And so over here, this is showing average attendance rate broken down by grade. This is the average percentage of school days in which kids are enrolled. Here, you're seeing that chronic absence rate broken down by grade level. And so this kid, I think right now, the number is if students have missed 12 days of school, they're considered chronically absent. It's sort of an interesting period of time right now. It's a little volatile. So when I presented full school committee, this number was 11.1%. Right now it's at 10.6%. So this is sort of moving all over the place. So if you come back in a couple of days, you might see this number move. Over here, you see sort of throughout the school year, and immediately starts with attendance rate. But it's interesting if you were to come over here, and you can see when cold and flu season hits, that obviously we see increases, but now hopefully we're going to be in a period where there are less colds, less flu. And so historically, we see this flattening out over the warmer months. And so in terms of a celebration, right, when I look at this, I see a pretty noticeable celebration here around ninth grade and how strong this attendance number is. And when I think about, so why is that the case? I know that the ninth grade team, the work that they're doing in that building is all geared around belonging, making sure that kids are in the space, they're in class, they're supported in the classroom, in every single space. If you're ever in the building during a transition, you will see deans and teachers in the hallways, making sure that kids are going where they're supposed to be going. And all their interactions with kids are built around to be supportive, right? So part of a program evaluation piece and seeing how strong this percentage is, that's a real celebration and a really strong comment on the work that they're doing. What you'll see, this is sort of interesting, is this is broken down by day. So again, we're looking at the full district level. We don't see it here, but there are opportunities to break it down by school. The boxes that are shaded more darkly indicate unusually high absenteeism in that day. Typically happens on the day before a school vacation or immediately afterward. And you see that reflected over here as well in these red lines, or almost always right before or after a break. And then here, demographics is where you start pulling out different student groups, right? So really easily being able to see attendance by group. In here, you're seeing broken down by race. This red part are the percentage of students. You can't see it just because it's a little small, but you also see the number of students who are chronically absent within these categories. And so as I noted during school committee, right, these discrepancies here are mirroring many of the discrepancies we're seeing in our academic outcome data, our belonging data, and a lot of sources of data, right? So it's a continued area here that we need to explore and to support. In the final, and you see these are all filter options that you can move through up here and also down here. And then finally here, as we're thinking about MTSS, we're thinking about tiers, right? Are students well supported by tier 1 instruction? Are kids needing tier 2 and tier 3 supports? This is a way broken down by grade level. And if we could see student level data, but obviously you're not going to protect confidentiality, if you clicked on any of these buckets, you'd see the kids in that grade level who are falling in these areas. And so for example, if we were in at a specific school and during a common planning time meeting, we want to know which of our kids are chronically absent, we would click on this, you would see that full list of names. And then down below, you would see that platform where you could also see panorama data, DIBELS data, and have that holistic view for how a student is doing, and then sort of move into that problem solving process. Any questions activated with this dashboard? All right.
I'm sorry, could you remind me again the definition for chronic absence?
Yep, and so really important distinction is so there's no difference between excused or unexcused. And it's students who have missed 10% of school days in which they're enrolled, right? So typically right now, if students have been enrolled since the first day of school, that number is 12 days of school. And so for most students who are enrolled in a full school day year, 10% would be 18 absences over the course of the school year. The big thing is just sometimes people ask that there's no difference between excused and unexcused.
So that's why that graph went up and down.
Exactly right. So yeah, so there are, for example, if a kiddo missed 5 days because of COVID and then had a family emergency and then had the flu, right? You could, in a very non-concerning way, get to 12 absences at this point in time. Right now, it's typically, historically, when we see chronic absenteeism peak. At this point of time last year, we were at 17.5% of kids were chronically absent. We ended the year at 14.5%. So right now we're sitting at around 10.5%. And so my assumption is that we would land closer to 10% by the end of the year.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Yeah.
So I have put up the DIBELS dashboard. And one of the things that Matt and I are spending some time doing right now is working with the group to talk to them about some of the things that aren't so helpful on the dashboard, and they're being really helpful. And we've asked teachers and we are getting feedback. And what's really awesome is Matt and I can see as people log in, and we're seeing tons of like counselors using this and the CST teams, and it's not even finished. But I do want to give you some insight into this dashboard. So this is our current DIBELS. And one of the things that I just want to make sure that you recognize is there's some data here that doesn't belong to the district. It's the norming data. So right here, this information here is how we're being normed. And so that is the national norm. That is not the district's scores. But what's really nice is you have that as a reference point as you look through the rest of the data. The other piece of that is normed, that's the University of Oregon's research with the Iowas. So it's a great place to use as a benchmark, but it is not.
And to give a little peek behind the scenes, so Michelle and I, we actually had a meeting with them earlier in the week. We have another meeting with them on Monday, where we're able to give them very explicit feedback. So for example, one example Michelle and I were just talking about for the meeting is that we think it'd be helpful in this graph, for example, is to have our data layered next to it so that we could really quickly see how we're comparing to these averages. And so that's a design feature that we're going to be able to give that feedback to, and they're going to be able to make those refinements.
So what's really nice about this is that down here, what you'll see is you have both our SY23 and our SY24 data benchmarked by period. So this is all grades. Oh, Stephen, before I get too far out,
just really dumb, basic question.
Just
So we're using Open Architect for our dashboard interface. The customization of the interface is done via meetings with an Open Architect liaison / consultant.
architect, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, is that like an ongoing consultancy that we have? Is there,
No.
or is this part of the package?
it's part of the
package.
package.
Part of the package.
Part of the
So,
package.
when do we select Open Architect as the dashboard? I just want some of like the super basics because I actually haven't
Basic.
seen.
The,
What was that?
the real basic is that the state gave us a dashboard for free over the past 2 years with MCAS. And then the state has a partnership with them to allow us to purchase a few other modules. So we had already been using it as a free product. So it didn't make sense to move to a different product since we knew this one.
But we're spending, this is not criticism, this is just me just trying to understand, but we're
Mhm.
spending on a consultancy so we can customize the dashboard so it meets our specifications.
Oh, so we were just paying
Yeah.
for the ability to, so we had access to the MCAS and Access data. And so now what we're paying for is to plug into all of our data systems so they can all come together into a comprehensive dashboard. But another behind the scenes, so they are recommended by DESE. Michelle and I met them at the same time. We were looking at, are there other companies that do something similar? There aren't a ton of places that are necessarily within this educational space of pulling in data. And so
They're a
financially,
single source.
yeah, and so financially, it sort of made sense for us to explore. So our contract, I think, goes for the rest of the
Yeah.
school year, and then we'll come back together.
But
Yeah.
the contract is not about the consulting. And the reason we have to meet with them is because we have to set up those conduits between our data and their data.
Yeah.
So they do the back end work. So
They're the
they're,
back end, yeah.
so they're connecting various databases with
Correct.
our dashboard.
Yeah.
So who's
Yeah.
doing the front end work? Who's customizing the view?
So
That's
so they do as well. So we tell them, hey, we actually don't like how this graph looks.
Yeah.
You change it to somewhere else and be like, okay, they go back.
So they're customizing both the front and the back end.
Yeah,
Yep.
Okay,
we don't-
thanks. I just wanted some of the basics on that.
yeah, no, and we don't do any work. I mean, the most awesome thing is their agreement with DESE. They pull data, they pull some of our data, right, from DESE, they pull from Aspen, they pull from Amplify. We do nothing but give them the conduit numbers they need or the account to get into it. And so it's very little work on our part to do this.
And this is year one of a 2-year subsidized package that DESE is granting us?
No, this is so that part of our package was subsidized. We, as part of our disproportionality, we purchased this year, that was
Mhm, yep,
disproportionality.
yep.
We purchased for this year, the rest of it, so that we can look at the disproportionality data, because this is a way to flag students or to actually get the right data. And then we'll need a new contract with them for next year.
Is the plan to extend the current contract or to?
Yeah, based on our, yeah.
Yeah, based on our early experience.
Okay, thanks. I didn't mean to hijack. I didn't know
No.
that stuff.
No. So when we get back into the dibbles, so one of the nice things here is this is all grades. Last year we gave beginning, middle, and end of the year assessment. This year we gave beginning and middle. And this is the blues are the percentage of students that are at or above benchmark. That is all 3 grades. But the really nice part of this is I can come up here and I can change the grade level. So if nothing is selected, so you know you're getting all the grades. But if I just put grade 2 in, what I have immediately is just grade 2 data in all of these areas. So I have the subtests here and those there are descriptions there of what is each subtest. What I want to just give you the warning on is on the RAN, which is the rapid naming test. Only students who are of deep concern will get the RAN, and that's something Dibbles does. It will prompt you to give a particular student the RAN. So when you look at this and you see the number of students, it is not the whole class. It is just certain students. Everything else, those numbers total up to be much larger. So here, 272 students are up at benchmark. So then the other piece also is just like as a celebration here. What you'll see here is that in second grade, between the beginning and the middle of the year, we have significantly increased our at and above benchmark. And that is just a celebration of the work that students are experiencing and going through to get there. Natalia.
Sorry, and this is, I'll maybe ask you a different type, but the RAN, it seems like it's only well below or below.
Mhm.
Why is
So
that?
because the students who get identified to take it are students that are at risk.
Yeah,
And
but then
so-
afterwards, I've just from my experience, I've seen RAN that then says above in the results.
It's, oh, go ahead.
Yeah. So I think so
Yeah.
the teams made the decision.
Yeah.
So the RAN task should be relatively insensitive to training and experience with it. So I believe the decision was made that if students had 2 occasions in which they did perform at or above benchmark on RAN, the decision was that they weren't going to give that task again. And so this is a subpopulation of kids who did not perform at benchmark on the RAN, and they decided to re-administer it to those students.
I'm confused, but it's not relevant to this conversation. Maybe
No,
I would love to understand it more, but
yeah, and it's a practice that we're trying to determine, are we doing it the best way?
Yeah, the one thing off, so like the sort of the theory there is if the student's performing well on RAN,
Yeah.
it's highly unlikely that in the future they perform poorly on that task. So as a way to save a minute of administration time for a student and the educator, that they'll then just re-administer that task for students who previously have not performed at benchmark on that task.
So Natalia, those are the 38 students that they suspected are struggling, and they gave them that test.
Well, so yeah, so
Yeah, it was about 100.
all kids got it, and this is a sub group of kids for whom there were additional concerns. So they gave that task. They re-administered that task to them.
so it's on the re-administration.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
Yes, and so the other thing that you can see is also that you can move through looking at different periods in the year, and you can look at different years. Again, like Matt said, is that if we had the student data, the individual student data open to, we can click on any bar and look at who the students are. You also can up here play with the filters, and you can determine the school. You can look specifically at a domain. So if you wanted to see how they were doing a composite or maze, which is the comprehension, you can do multiple, you can look at different specific subtests to look at a student. And you might want to do it for multiple reasons. You might think about the instruction you've been working on in the classroom and want to look in those specific areas, especially because this is our earliest readers. And then the other thing, just to tell you, and this is like how we were talking about feedback, this table down here is one that Matt and I decided today we were going to give some feedback on, because again, these are the national numbers. They aren't our numbers. And one thing we think that would be really helpful is to have the national number next to the Brookline number so that we can do some closer comparing without having to do a ton of computation.
Oh, so that's really important to know. Those are the national numbers?
Yeah, so this was one, so this is a new dashboard to us, but this one and this up here are the
Yeah.
national numbers. And so what we want to do is actually have Brookline show in both of those areas, so we can look a little bit more
Right,
deeply.
and so as an example, right, so down here you see, this is in grade 2, right, so 65% of students nationally perform at or above the composite score, as compared to 74% of students in Brookline in grade 2.
So our plan is to give you an opportunity to do some of your own playing in there, and be able to ask us some questions while we're here. And you can indicate when either you've hit your limit or you have questions, either way.
Right, so we need to log in.
Yep.
Is the goal to get to know the dashboard or to get to know the subject matter or a little of both or?
I think the dash, awesome question, Steve. So
Yeah,
I think one thing that Michelle and I are thinking about is this, to get a feel of, okay, here are the questions, for example, when we're about to have a presentation, right? But here are the questions I'm pretty confident that Michelle or Jody or Matt can get to pretty quickly. And so that's going to help guide some of those conversations. So more of a feel for the dashboard itself, I think is what we're thinking as an outcome for the exercise.
Yeah. And if you see anything interesting in there and you want to flag it for us, that's great
Yep.
too.
Yep.
Okay, so why don't we work backwards a little bit? Jody, how long will you need? How much time are you giving us to do this right now? Like,
I need about 5 minutes for the SOA.
oh, that's all you need?
That's all I
That's not very much. You figure we
No,
don't have
it's-
any questions, huh?
need. Oh, maybe 10 for questions.
Okay, okay. Okay, we got plenty of time then.
You have plenty of time, and if you hit a threshold, like, we are happy to.
Yeah.
We're gonna leave this open to you for a few days so that you can spend a little time in it, like,
Yeah.
we weren't planning on shutting it. This
Yeah.
dashboard was made specifically for you. So, we can still get the other data.
Right, but we, after you shut us down, we won't be able to access the dashboard. Is that what you're saying?
Right, so what I'm saying is,
No.
this dashboard will leave open for you. We have other dashboards, we don't have to change permissions on this, so we'll leave it open. You know, and
I heard you groan, Stephen. Are you
Yeah,
okay?
why would you suggest that they would shut it down for us? It'll be,
we're doing this as a demo, we wanted to see how this went.
I see.
I think
We hadn't
we have-
thought about, we hadn't
Yeah.
thought about, like,
Yeah.
do you want it all the time? I mean, this is
Yeah.
really simple data that you see from us. The same data we release, but you'd have in the minute data.
Yeah, I mean, right. I think
Yeah.
it would be like, I think it would be awesome to have us have like a basic level of dashboard literacy so that we are
Yeah.
bothering you for this kind of information,
Mm.
coupled with like a solid expectations management primer where we don't then like every time we like try to get information, feel entitled to ask you for lots of information based on that information. But I mean, I think this, the more informed we are based on the
Sure.
data,
Yeah.
the better we can be, I would think.
Yeah, I mean,
So again, when you do benchmarks by domain, I'm over here. And we say that letter sounds 17% are well below of our second graders.
yeah,
Um,
I noticed that one.
so these numbers are concerning, right? Letter sounds. And that was mid-year.
Uh-huh,
Mhm.
So the 17% of our students do not have not made benchmark on letter sounds in second grade.
so it's actually 26%.
Yeah, if you add the below.
That's 9, but
Yeah.
what's interesting about that is then if you look to the right and you see sort of how did we fall within the national? And so Suzanne, what would be your next question then about that 26%? So you see there's 26% that are
Yeah,
because
I mean,
it's not a blanket 26%, right? It's not. So
I mean, I would start looking, of course, at individual students and see
Yeah.
what they have and what they don't have. But I mean, letter sounds is pretty basic.
And Suzanne, so this task is so Dibbles actually doesn't have a pure letter sound fluency task. So for example, a task where you would just get a series of letters and you would articulate the phoneme grapheme correspondence. What they do is they present this, so that NWF stands for nonsense word fluency. So you have a series of
Okay.
nonsense words,
Mhm.
and the student is essentially decoding that word. The
Mhm.
expectation at this point is, for example, if a student saw like was like WUZ, they would go was, and that would be 3 correct letter sounds.
Mhm.
Now the expectation, and you're going to see it, is eventually they're going to recode that entire word and just say was
Nice.
afterwards. And so for us, this is really a decoding task, right? And I would say in general, when we're thinking about from an instructional standpoint, if anything is sort of beyond 80%, is where we start thinking about tier 1 instruction. And then, of course, in the moment, pulling out those individual students to see what additional practice they need.
And that could be in the, I mean, like a lot of times that's things like that are in the classroom. It's additional practice at the basics that we do. But what I did was I just flipped the filter a little bit, because a couple of things, this is every single student in the 2nd grade. So this can include students on this, this does include all of our EL students, all of our students on IEPs. So depending on their profile might mean we have to dig in a little deeper to see, is that 17% representative of students who have a language-based disability, or students who have are level 1 in language? And that starts to change those numbers. And we do have the ability to do that when we have all the students' data listed here.
And I offer too, a really powerful thing about DIBELS is because we're doing it at 3 measurement occasions in a year, right? There could be students in that 9% gray area who are below benchmark. So if we clicked on that, we would actually see a list of all students who are in that area. And then we'd be able to see what their beginning of year score was, right? So for a student who maybe moved from well below to below, that's really meaningful growth. And actually could be a celebration and sort of evidence that we should keep on doing what we're doing, versus kids, for example, who maybe moved down into the below composite score. So that growth indicator is something we're going to have rapid access to.
Okay, Sarah has a question, then Stephen. Sarah, go ahead.
So what you just said was a little bit of part of that, Matt, that I was interested in, was you're kind of talking about the specifics of how you would use this as feedback and what you would do with it. So then right before you had said something else that I didn't quite catch, when there's a certain percentage of students that do something, then tier 1 kicks in. Could you talk about that again?
Yeah, so and this is sort of when we think about MTSS, when we think about multi-tier systems of support, oftentimes when we operationalize, so what does it mean for tier 1 to be effective? Sometimes the level that we use with 80% of students in a given area are meeting the benchmarks. That would be evidence that that tier 1 approach is supporting the vast majority of students. A lot of that is conceptual as you think about allocation of resources within a system, and that when you need to allocate tier 2 and tier 3 interventions to more than 20% of kids, that's where it can be sort of a strain on the system. So some of that is conceptual, but that could be sort of a gold standard, if you will, benchmark, that if you're pretty consistently in your areas having 80% of your kids across demographic groups meeting different thresholds for performance, that's a good indicator that tier 1 is working.
So it's a good indicator that tier 1 is working, but then is there, like, I was just curious overall with all of this, is if there's something that automatically kicks in that's a change in practice because of some sort of percentage is met or isn't met, or is this just about setting goals and keeping track of whether those goals get met without having anything change in practice?
So I think it's a really good question. And I think, like, Sarah, one of the things that I noticed, so I brought up kindergarten just to look more specifically at an example. And one of the things that we see in kindergarten is right around here, when we're looking at phonemic awareness, like I see 55% of students below or well below, or 50, 60, 55% of students below or well below. My first question is going to be, actually, that's too many students. Like, that's not an intervention, that's a classroom issue. And so I'm going to look at my instruction. To your point, it's not that what we want to get into the practice of is not something automatically kicks in, an intervention that automatically kicks in. What I want to look at this is say, what have I done in this so far in my class? Is this number a surprise to me, or do I have evidence that students were either getting there or not? And then if I have taught a lot of it, and my evidence doesn't match this, there's a couple of things. I'm going to look back at who these students are, and that's going to be part of my regular classroom instruction. In addition, I'm going to look at benchmarking to make sure that I am assessing it as I go along. But I think the other piece is, if it's a surprise to me, then I might need to be teaching it differently. And that's when I can go back to like materials I have, the supports I have to determine that. So it's, what we're not looking for is automatically saying all students need other people to be doing things or other interventions.
And when you say you meant that you yourself
the
would be the
teacher.
classroom teacher.
Yeah.
So it could also be that the classroom teacher looks at this and is like, oh, I was really prioritizing that math project for that week.
Exactly.
And so
Mhm.
I know that I'm going to get better at this by March. And so I'm just going to be okay.
Yep, exactly. Remember that skills develop by the end of the year. We're looking to make that end of the year and to see the growth for students.
Exactly.
Stephen?
Yeah, is there, do you come up with data for 23, 24 beginning of the year?
Mhm.
If we have to pull any up.
So, 22, 23, 24. Oh, not for kindergarten, because the kindergarten window, so the state requires us to do 2 assessments a year that we are informed on, requires to suggest 3 for kindergarten. We determined that doing it right in the first month of school, if many of them hadn't been in any other formal education, that was not the time to assess.
But we did it in 22, 23, right?
And we learned from it.
Interesting. Okay,
We
thanks.
learned that it was like, we didn't get enough from it to make it worthwhile, because we're also not looking to put kids in immediately into intervention who hadn't been in early intervention.
Really, it didn't give us like a baseline to see how we were doing
Well,
by the midline?
I think, I mean, here's the thing. One of the reasons that we identified this assessment, well, okay, so that's sort of interesting. You
Yeah.
look at the middle year, beginning. It's something to revisit.
Yeah.
It's something to revisit.
Yeah, so Steve, I think that's, and that was, I think
That's
that
a really good-
people
yeah.
were going through. So I think the concern was from a developmental perspective, were there some quote unquote false positive? Were there some kids who were performing poorly just because they're 5
Oh, that-
and doing this kind of task can be challenging versus that competing demand. And it's so nice to have that growth indicator from the fall to the winter. And so I know there were some assessments that the kindergarten teams did do around letter sounds to have some source of data as kids are coming in, but I think that's a thing that we'll revisit.
I think we need to revisit, and here what you're gonna see is like, oh, so ran up everybody questioning. All right, so yeah, we're learning from your diving in some interesting information for ourselves.
It was honestly curiosity. If you think that it's not giving you good information, then I defer to you.
It's year 2, so actually what you just asked is a great thing for us to reflect on, and one of the reasons we want other people looking at this with us.
Okay.
Really good
The related
question.
question
By
is,
looking at it, I would question it for myself.
I'm also assuming that the beginning, midline, and end of year, those are all normed to that point of the year too, right? It's not the same thing 3 times, right? Okay,
Yep.
thanks.
Thanks, Stephen. Natalia?
So, I mean, I'm struggling because I'm curious about details on the work, but I want to sort of step back at the dashboard. So trends really matter. And I see the trend for, on the national, like, I'm curious, who do you expect to use these dashboards? Is it the classroom teacher? Is it the principal?
Really
to
good question.
sustain, and what are you encouraging them to focus on? My challenge with dashboards is that there's so much information, and it's important to highlight, like, we really are focused on trends. You said, that we expect under 20%, and if a classroom is doing worse, there has to be a reason. Like, maybe it is that there's a high number of children who are English language learners, or, but who is responsible? I feel like with something like this, some teachers may be really keen to play around and some may not, but what is the expectation?
Yep.
Yeah, I think we're building that as we go. One thing that we're really excited about, it's a question that Michelle and I have been kicking around a lot, is that we imagine there's going to be different dashboards for different people in different views for different folks, right? So the dashboard that's going to be really helpful for a principal, you're probably spot on. It's going to be a very different dashboard that's helpful for a 3rd grade teacher. And so part of what we're going to be doing throughout the spring is getting this in people's hands, and then having them experience and say, ooh, this actually, like, and we've done some of this where people have been very honest and saying, I can't imagine myself using this part of it in my practice. but I can't imagine it using this part within my practice. So that's the one thing we're excited about the relationship, that there is that customization, because we know needs are going to be different.
And I think your point is well taken about overload. Overload is not going to help us move our practice. And so we've seen some dashboards. We saw one yesterday that we really like for teachers. It's just that one we weren't able to preview with you today because it wasn't quite ready for us. They're feeding data into it. So
I guess I would say in my experience, it's been really helpful when there are one or two folks in the school that spend time on this and then share that with the classroom teachers. So it could be maybe a vice principal for the lower grades, or it could be a literacy specialist, or a resource center person who gets into this. But my experience has been that it's really been helpful for classroom teachers when there's somebody who leads the conversation and can point the trends and say, let's talk about this and this, because it does tend to be overwhelming. And you could, we're going down in the weeds in some areas, and maybe those aren't the weeds we should be in. We should be in other weeds or something, So to have all this information, I think, again, it's you really need to think, we need to think about, how is it shared and who shares it and what becomes of it.
Well, I think that's why also Jody's point and Michelle's point at the beginning about using the strategic plan as the master narrative at the beginning, to which this reports out, is a really good one, that it cuts through a lot of the noisiness. Although I think this is a really elegant dashboard. This feels like a pretty easy to read dashboard to me, but it helps you just present out it helps you visualize the data that needs to be visualized. So you tell a story that you're trying to tell in the district. Like, well, this is what a successful district looks like. And these are the key indicators towards that story.
And if it takes away like our time that we spend, because you don't have access to the individual student data, but when that's part of this, if you can click in a particular domain and say, there's an intervention group because they have some similar challenges, and it actually makes sense, that's really quick. Instead of having to like look through each student and their profile, you have it like right at your fingertips. So there's some stuff we'll be able to do to help with that.
Natalia?
Yeah, just a word of caution, and I worry that I fall into your category of I liked your 6 domains of acceptance, but it really depends on, we have to be confident that this benchmarking, this test is both done in a consistent manner, that the teachers know how to do it, that this really is telling us what we want to know, because the other risk is basically that you overemphasize some random metric because you have the metric and it's not, and it misses like what you're actually, so like that confidence that DIBELS is really an appropriate assessment, and that our teachers are, because I understand it's the classroom teachers that do it with the students. There's a lot of, a lot of variation, and not, on how you do it, or the kid, just a little bit like, I worry with dashboards sometimes because we don't ask those questions enough to make sure that, but that's your responsibility. I trust you.
No, you're, I'm laughing because Michelle and I have talked about this a lot. So this is only going to be as good as the data that's going into it. Right. And so we've had conversations around how are we going to more consistently, for example, enter data in Aspen around attendance, right? So that we can feel really confident around what the data are showing us, right? It was actually been helpful with the dashboards as we're seeing some curiosities. It's helped us ask some questions around data entry, which has been helpful for us. More specific with the DIBELS, I think last year, Michelle and the crew were incredibly thoughtful about the rollout and doing a lot of, like, our goal this year is to administer it with fidelity. And now this year, moving into some additional utilization of it, exactly because of what you were talking about, Natalia.
And one of the things that we've done to talk about the implementation of the assessment is there was both a reading specialist and a teacher working in every classroom this year to ensure like alignment, so that because I know there's been a lot of conversation in the past about the BAS being subjective, and there's lots of it is subjective, and that was one thing that we intentionally looked for when we went after the universal screener. This is required by the state, and when we looked at what we wanted, one of the things is the reliability, because exactly what you said, subjectivity, like Matt said, is only as good as what you put in.
Okay. Other thoughts or questions on this? What I might suggest is it possible that you could leave our access open for a while so that I don't know that we're gonna get to it. I mean, because when I get into it, I like get down into it. So,
Yeah.
I would need more than 5 minutes to do that.
We'll
So-
leave it.
Will we have access for a while with this?
Yeah.
Unless we are told we can't.
Okay.
Mhm.
So I would suggest that we actually play around with it a little bit, kind of get a feel for it. Maybe write down our questions or comments or send them off
Sure.
to you if that's okay. And then we can wrap up on this topic for today. Does that sound right? Anybody want a last word about that? I mean, we have time for a last word if you want something else. Okay. I mean, there's a lot here. There's a lot here to go over, so that's great. Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Jody, I'm going to turn it over to you then.
Excellent, thank you. So every 3 years, the district is required to write a plan that, because of the Student Opportunity Act, which was the governmental act that gave more money and the foundational funding to school districts. Our 3 years is up this year, so we have to actually submit a new plan April 1st. We'll be bringing this to the full committee on the 28th, but that's going to be a very long meeting, I'm assuming. So I thought I would give this group kind of a brief overview of what's in it. And the reason I can be so brief is we have our strategic plan, which is also for 3 years. And so the things that we're focusing on, we have to focus on certain subgroups whose performance we want to improve. So we're focusing on the subgroups that we've identified in our strategic plan, our Black and Latina students, and the opportunity gap that exists between their white and Asian peers. With this plan, all of these steps, it's really just a rewording and almost a summary of our strategic plan. It'll be in your packet for the meeting on the 28th, but I wanted to give you a heads up that it was coming. Look for it, look for its consistency with the strategic plan, and if you have any questions, let me know and I'll be prepared to answer them. But I'm not anticipating that this will be controversial or something that provokes a lot of discussion, because it does so closely mirror the strategic plan.
Questions, thoughts? I mean, I guess I would just say this is at the state level, right, Jody? This is for the state. And so is it a separate form that you complete?
It is a separate form. You have to fill it out in GEMS, which is the grant management system. It doesn't have any money attached to it, which is interesting. It's just a requirement of that foundational piece. So the budgetary items that I did put in it are the cost of our new reading program and a partnership that we are going to have with New Teacher Center to design our MTSS system so that it's truly robust for our students. Those are the two big buckets of work that we're highlighting in the plan.
How closely does it resemble the strategic plan? I mean, how neatly does the plan map onto this this template?
I had the strategic plan open while I wrote it, and literally went side by side and did even a little bit of cutting and pasting.
Handy.
It was so convenient. I remember Michelle struggling with the end of the year report last year for this report, and I almost felt a little guilty because it was so easy to write because we had just done the strategic plan.
So is it just coincidence that it's the 3-year plan and the strategic plan is the 3, and they're at the same time?
It is. We lucked out,
We lucked out. Okay,
or I
That's
lucked out as for writing it.
right. And so the budget that, well, you mentioned, but you didn't have to put a budget in with this plan, or you did?
You did. So I did $1.5 million for the cost of the full rollout of the ELA plan, which seems like a huge number saying it out loud, given everything we're going through right now. I think it's around 150,000 for the partnership with New Teacher Center over the course of the next 3 years.
Is that 1.5 million? That's over 3 years, or that's next year? Over
No,
3?
that's over 3 years. Next year's only 500,000.
Okay.
And is that now fully funded in the current budget?
It is.
Okay, anything you want us to know that we need to help support when it comes to the full committee?
No, I think, I think it should look very familiar and feel very comfortable to people, just as a rewording or sometimes the same wording as our strategic plan.
Okay. Any other? Gabe, are you joining us to say something? No?
No, I just had to take a phone call from Anthony and I'm back.
Okay.
Thank you. Are there any other questions that you guys all have?
I guess not. I think we're good.
Like in general?
That's up to Suzanne.
Well, we have new business. This is part of new business. If there's something else in new business. No, Stephen's shaking
Okay.
his head. No. Okay. Any other new business? Anybody have any other things they want to bring up? Okay, then we actually can adjourn a few minutes early, if that's okay with people. Okay, I move to adjourn. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Natalie, second. Stephen?
Yeah.
Yeah, Natalia?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. Thank you very much to our presenters today. I really appreciate all that work, Matt and Michelle, that you did. Thank you so much. And we are going to have fun. You can spend your 15 minutes looking at your dashboard.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.